Hi, everybody. My name is Jessica Kong, Festival Director of Happy Fest. Thank you so much for joining us for tonight's Q&A. And thank you for celebrating Happy Fest on our last day of films as well. As a friendly reminder, we have pre-recorded Q&As from all of our filmmakers available now on our YouTube channel, OCA Greater Houston, including a Q&A with the director for Yellow, King Yasun. Tonight's Q&A will be broadcast live on YouTube and Facebook Live, so please feel free to ask any questions in the comment section and we'll do our best to address them during the interview today. I'm very excited to speak to our next guests. It's been a pleasure seeing their journey over the past few years, and so I'm really excited to dive right into their feature film, Far East Deep South. Please welcome the director, writer, producer, Larissa Lamb, and the producer, Baldwin Chiu.
Hi, everyone. Great to be here.
Hey,
Hi.
everybody.
Thank you so much for joining us.
Oh, yeah.
So like I said, I'm really excited to talk about Far East Deep South. And, you have a lot of history with Houston as well, with us, being able to screen both Far East Deep South and Finding Cleveland. Between Finding Cleveland and Far East Deep South, how much time do you think you really spent dedicated to researching your family's history?
I guess we should, explain that Finding Cleveland was our short film that I guess we released officially, back in 2015, or is that sound about right, Reese, or 14?
Yeah, we did it we released it in 2015. I think around like 2017, we came out to Houston and did a screening that, OCA Greater Houston and Happy Fest also, helped promote. That's when we first met you, Jessica. And then of course we screened last year at Happy Fest amidst the pandemic. And then here we are a year later on this, journey. And I think I want to say loosely like 100 hours. It's probably more, because it's not just the family research, it's also the research in terms of the history, of the region. And even coming out to like Houston, there's a huge population of former Mississippi Deltons, is that the proper word to describe them?
Deltonians?
Deltons, yeah, like Mississippians. Right. It's kind of like the little Mississippi out in Houston, where a lot of them had moved to. And so even just talking to everybody there, we learned so much. And so lots and lots of research.
No, absolutely. And I can totally relate, because that's actually my family's history as well. My mom and grandmother and my aunts, they started in Mississippi as well. So, such a rich history. And so I was really excited to share this film with my family as well, because they just saw so many parallels.
Good thing you are the director of the film festival, or else they'd be like, oh man, we had a director from Chicago and they would not have played our film. No. That's pretty cool, that your history too, though. I forgot about that. So thanks for reminding me.
Yes. Well, and I think it just speaks on so many levels that, even if they can't relate that their history was in the Deep South, they can relate that their history started somewhere. And so I think that's what you really showcased so well in your film, is that if you really want to search your family's history, there's ways to get there, and there's resources out there for people to do that. And
yeah, absolutely. We always joke, like, in our film, we are trying to find a cemetery, and Baldwin's brothers' strategy was, let's just drive around. Like, he literally was saying, like, I'm going to look at the map, anything that's green that says cemetery on it, we're just going to drive to, and hopefully we'll walk up and down the aisles of all the gravestones, and set point we're going to find him, because how many Chinese people were buried in Mississippi? And again, we didn't know that there was a whole population. It was actually going to be it was going to be a lot harder than we thought. But nowadays we know there's something like findagrave.com, where you can actually just type in your ancestor's name, and
wow.
their cemetery and their actual plot location will show up. So we did it the hard way, but we still found it.
That is really interesting. I had no idea that website exists.
Yeah. But I think that's kind of the main part of our film, is like, we wanted it to not be an Asian American film or a Chinese American film. We wanted it to be an American film, and we wanted to make sure that the film was relatable to people, that even though it was my personal family story, it's just an example of everyone's personal family story and how everyone has an opportunity to search their own. And that's that history that if you dig deep enough, most likely will be very significant, even if you think it's not.
No, you're exactly right. I mean, there's so many resources out there for Asian Americans to both research and archive their families' histories. How did you connect with the sources and to find your family's records?
Well, Edwin, my brother-in-law, he called City Hall, and he mentions that in the film as kind of a first stop. And you'd be surprised, for smaller, towns and cities, I think you're going to have a hard time, digging for certain things, and larger cities. But you'd be surprised, like there are records held at every government level. And so City Hall happened to know they actually had the cemetery records, and so that's how Edwin was able to kind of find out where the cemeteries, or at least they could tell you all the different cemeteries. And then they also told us about the Mississippi Delta Chinese Heritage Museum. And that's another thing we also didn't know, is that, again, around the country, a lot of local universities have archives and have departments, or even local museums, that keep a lot of family records, and they keep a lot of artifacts from the community. And so those were places that we started there. And then Baldwin did more of the research for the National Archives that you see in kind of chapter 3 of our film. You want to talk about that, Baldwin?
Yeah, I mean, we did research on genealogy websites like Family Search and Ancestry.com, and then we took that information and found a researcher at the National Archives and worked with that researcher. And it took a while because in the beginning we got the names wrong. We knew what the names were, but we didn't know how they archived or filed the names. Was it by first name or was it by last name?
How was it spelled?
Right. As you saw in our film, our first name was really our last name, or if you want to say it the other way around, our last name was really our first name. And so they got it all flipped back. And yes, that, like Larissa said, the spelling was off, and then we had to get the years correct for each person. So eventually our researcher found one, and it was cool because you find one, then they usually reference another family
member they found, first. And then they were able to have all the other files linked to them, cross-referenced.
Yeah.
That's awesome. And, you really showed that PACE seemed like such a great community support, or a great community with a great support system, in the way that they were able to help you really connect with all the people that knew your family. Do you think that if your grandfather lived in a bigger city, that it would have been more difficult to find these same kind of connections or resources?
I think so. I think definitely would have been harder, but I don't think I would call it that the little town of Pace had a system. I think it was just because they were small and that they were willing to speak with us, and that there were relationships that were built. There had to have been significant and trustworthy, or maybe not trustworthy, but sincere relationships to have been there for people to have actually remembered my grandfather and great grandfather, or even to recognize that, back in the days, even because most of the people in Pace that you met, they were children when their memories they were talking about their memories, and so they're talking about their grandfathers and their fathers and their mothers, and they're recalling their history and their dealings with the early Chinese in Pace. So those relationships must have been strong enough for them to have a vivid memory in their minds even today.
No, that's true. But that's also really, I'm sure that was so pleasing for your family to know that your grandfather had such a legacy, even before you knew about it, right?
Yeah, we joke, if he had been a jerk and everybody hated him, there would be no movie, right? That Casey Lou, that scoundrel. It would be a completely different movie, and probably not one we would have told.
That's true. Other than he was very memorable.
Yeah, he was memorable for the wrong reasons.
Kind of diving into that, were you were there moments when you were digging through all of the history that you were nervous about what you might uncover, or that you might actually hit roadblocks along the way where you couldn't go any further?
I think definitely the first, when we first tried to tell a little or learn more about the relationship between the Chinese and the Black community, because our first trip in Finding Cleveland, for those of you who have seen that, we didn't have any testimonials. We didn't get a chance to meet on that first day that we were, and the only day we were in Cleveland, Mississippi. We didn't have a chance to really meet anybody there. So it really took additional trips out there and you know, really trying to meet that community. And I think, Larissa, you were worried, right? You were, because you know, you're from LA, right? And so you
weren't sure. And of course, through a contemporary lens, you know, we know there's certain tensions between our communities sometimes in the major cities. And so I didn't know the moment we found out that, a lot of the Chinese had to live in the Black neighborhoods because they were shut out of the white neighborhoods. And so, you know, we didn't know, well, what did the Black community think about that? But we wanted to find out, you know, even if the answer was a kind of a slightly mixed bag or even a negative one. And what we were surprised to find, as you guys see in the film, is that the older Black community had such respect for the Chinese community, and you know, because they were treated with respect by the Chinese community there during those times, and they were both kind of in the same boat and had to kind of rely on each other to survive and get around the kind of oppressive and marginalized system there.
Yeah, and I was worried that because we had heard the stories from both the Chinese and the white community about the relationships in the Black community, like, you know, about the credit and living there and their relationships. But then I was thinking in my mind, what if it's totally the opposite from the Black community? When we interview them, like, what if they say this totally different, right? And it would be like a he said, she said, you know, like, who do we believe? And then we'd be caught in the middle. It was like, oh man, what's going on here? So I was really glad to hear that the stories were mutual. They were very similar, and it was very heartwarming to know that there was this symbiotic relationship there.
No, that's really nice. Like, it's very hard to imagine what our families kind of went through back then, having segregation and, you know, facing segregation, and with Asians being kind of that middle road, not really knowing where they fit in. It just ties in all to the whole cultural identity that we always, even to today, struggle with.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I think, you know, the film starts off with, you know, with people asking me, well, where are you from? Where are you really from? And I think all of us of Asian descent have gotten that question somewhere. And it always really, for me, it's always boiled down to, like, do people ask me that because they don't think I belong here? Or, you know, and so I think, you know, when we showed this film, we really wanted people to understand how much we do belong here, and that the stories that we have are not, you know, like, you know, the people in Mississippi, they're like, we're not unicorns. It's not like a one-time shot where, like, you show up, whoa, Chinese in Mississippi. Oh, and then the unicorn flies away and then there's no more Chinese people, right? They're like,
well, that would be an alicorn, to correct you, because
I'm sorry.
A unicorn does not have wings. Pegasus has wings, and a unicorn that's also a Pegasus, that is called an alicorn,
yes,
according to our daughter in My Little Pony.
My daughter would be very upset at me right now for getting mixed up between an alicorn and a unicorn.
Yes,
alicorn would, yes. So the unicorn would gallop away.
Well, the whole point, I mean, back to Baldwin's point, though, yeah, Jessica, you didn't think there would be a My Little Pony, you know, reference
into this, yeah.
But, you know, you just mentioned it. Your family is from that reason. Like, where are you really from? Mississippi, right? And it's not just Houston area that the Mississippi Delta Chinese moved to. It's all over the United States. I mean, we have a lot of people here in Southern California, like somebody I grew up with, I didn't even know was from Mississippi, who actually knew Baldwin's grandfather. You know, we always joke, like, they live among us. They're not just all still stuck in the Delta. Like, and there's descendants, you know, like yourself, that are all in Baldwin, like, that are all fanned across the United States. And so, you know, we really are, I'm now saying we, like, I'm from Mississippi, I'm not, but I feel, because I'm married to the family, you know, there's so many of you
of us
that are part of the fabric of America, you know, that is rooted in Mississippi.
I thought it was funny how, like, Larissa, you would say, like, I always thought my Uncle Jimmy had a funny voice. Like he had a weird accent, but it didn't sound like it was a Chinese accent. But I had no idea where it was from.
I never bothered to, you know, my family friend Jimmy Joe, who some people might be watching might know him. You know, unfortunately, he passed away before we could get him on camera. I mean, that was one of the challenges of making the film, is we had a lot of older people who had memories, and it was kind of a race against time to get him on camera before they passed away or lost their memory. But yeah, I had no idea. I grew up with him. He's known me since I was a baby, and I had no idea he was from Mississippi, Cleveland, Mississippi, nonetheless, until, that's a whole nother longer story. But then to find out there was a connection to Baldwin's family.
It's amazing to see how such a, you think you're in your own bubble, and then it's really just a small world away, like that you have all these different connections.
Yeah, most definitely.
I want to kind of dive into more of, one of the scenes that kind of stuck out was you had mentioned like Casey took many trips back to China. I'm curious, when did those visits actually occur? Because I know the big thing about the story was the connection between, father and son. That was a very main, driving force to really uncover your family's roots. How often did he actually visit, and how long did he actually stay?
Yeah, I think according to the documents, it's probably 3 or 4 times. He came over and he went back and he got married, and then he probably came back and he checked on, checked in with the family, and he had a family. He had a child first, but it was a girl. So the oldest child was not my father. It was my dad's sister. So he came back to the U.S. and then went back again to father another child, and then that was my dad, and then I think
that was the last time.
No, I think he came back, right? Because he came back, and then he came back after my dad.
No, he didn't. He, according to the documents, so it's a long, it's like a 30-40 day trip to get over to China. So when the last trip that he went, he actually stayed for like over a year and a half. So he actually
that's right.
helped conceive the child, and then stayed for the birth of the child, Charles Chiu, and then a little bit. And then because Baldwin's great-grandfather had passed away, he ended up coming back to the United States. So it might have actually almost been like maybe even 2 years that he was in China that last time. So yes, I think it was about 3 or 4 trips. And, each time it was to get married, it was to have older sister. And then, the last time was, unfortunately, the last time he saw Baldwin's dad and the rest of the family, and he never made it back.
No, thank you for sharing that. To kind of like, it's so hard to kind of follow the timeline sometimes when you're watching the film and digging in,
and you're the first person to actually ask us, I think, that question about about asking about how many times they went back and forth, and pick up on the fact that she did mention many
several times. Yeah,
right. But yes, all those many times happened prior to Baldwin's father being born.
Okay. No, thank you for sharing. Because that just really stuck with me, being like a sociology minor. I was like just finding all those, groupings and family. Anyway, kind of diving in more into, your research process again. Did you have a guide whenever you started your research process? I know that you said Edwin just started right at the city hall, but after so many years, you're basically an expert in the amount of research that y'all did. Did you actually kind of along the way figure out like a blueprint or a guide that kind of helped you along the way?
We call ourselves accidental genealogists and historians, honestly. Emily Jones from the museum helped us quite a bit in terms of connecting to certain people. And, like even Emerald Dunn, whose family bought Baldwin's grandfather's store, became a connecting point for us. Gilroy
she's a historian herself in that area. So she really loved digging into the research. So she helped out quite a bit because of that.
Yeah, and I would say, Gilroy Chow, ended up connecting us with his brother, Happy M, and it just started. It's just like once you meet somebody, it's a chain reaction, more or less. And then things like even doing like Finding Cleveland helped us in terms of like touring when we were touring the country back in those days when we were traveling in person with real audiences. You know, we would go to places like New York and do a screening, and then somebody stands up and goes like, "Hey, have you seen the Chinese exclusion files for your family?" And we're like,
what are
those? We had no idea. And so the last part of the film wouldn't have happened if we hadn't gone and actually done the short film and and exhibited it for other people to see. And then that's when we learned that the Chinese exclusion files existed, at San Bruno, and they exist in other National Archives branches. If your family came in, in and out of Seattle, for instance, there would probably be files on them in the Seattle National Archives branch. And so it happened. We went back to San Francisco, where Baldwin was born, and where his father came in to find the files. It was kind of like
it was there all along.
Yeah.
Which is how I kind of framed Far East Deep South. We start in San Francisco, we end in San Francisco, but yet we journey through Mississippi, because that's exactly how our journey went. And we just thought it was crazy. Like the answers were in his backyard the whole time, and we didn't know.
No, that's really cool. And, that really shows how, in following your history, you can really connect the dots, and make it back that way.
Yeah.
And then kind of going back to what you said about touring and, doing all of the, conversations and interviews and everything with your Finding Cleveland and Far East Deep South. You had mentioned, I remember last year in our Q&A with Finding Cleveland, that people had actually reached out to you about hosting seminars about, ways to do research. And are you still conducting those types of workshops, or have you thought about continuing the service even after, this project is essentially kind of winding down now?
One of my favorite lines is Baldwin's dad at the very end of our film. He's like, "You two should be investigators." And we just hosted a panel last month with several other genealogy experts. We're actually going to be posting the videos soon. So if anybody's interested in some of those videos, definitely go to our website, fareastdeepsouth.com, to subscribe to our newsletters, or even check out our video, our video bank playlist, because we previously had done one on digging up our roots. And we also have a podcast, Love, Discovery, and Dim Sum, where we have talked about this in the past. And so we plan on doing more of these types of workshops, because there seems to be such a great interest. So in addition to the panel I just mentioned, we've also spoken at Roots Tech, which is a major family history conference. And that video is also available online, where we kind of go through a little bit of some of the things that we discovered in our research. But yeah, we love having these conversations, because the one thing that's been really cool that it wasn't like a primary focus, but certainly it's been neat to see people really inspired to go find their history. And one of the things we did want to happen was that people would tell their stories. And there were so many people out there that were like us, were like, they don't know anything. And so if we can find it, maybe you can too.
Well, one of the things that one of the National Genealogy Conference said to me was like, "Hey, if how many people do you think can name their name, give us the name of their great grandfather?" And people were like, "Well, most of us could not name the name of our great grandfather." And then she said, "Well, just imagine, it only takes 2 generations before you become a great grandfather. So that means your name's going to be forgotten in 2 generations, since you can't even remember the name of somebody from 2 generations ago." So her whole point was, of course, do you really want to be forgotten? If not, then let's start talking to each other. Let's start talking to our elderly people. Let's start talking to our kids, and let's let them know our stories, because if we can be very easily forgotten.
Yeah, so that is definitely something that we are doing, periodically. Again, for those who want to follow us, whether it's through our newsletter, on our website, or our social media, we love doing these chats where people we can share about what we did and what we experienced, but also take questions from people about how that we might be able to help them, because we love doing it.
That's really cool. I'm learning so much. I didn't know there was also like a family genealogy conference, but it makes sense, right? It's such an interesting field that, is the makeup of our being. So it's only natural to see like more efforts and investments in that type of field. So that's really cool that you're involved with that.
And there's genealogy groups all around the country, family history groups. So there's all sorts of organizations that dedicate their lives to helping others, and or just even people who like finding stuff about their families. That it's kind of this like niche subculture that we've all discovered now.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And one of the undercurrent themes in the film, and that you kind of touched on early on with your short Finding Cleveland, is that you just had no idea that there was a Mississippi Delta, right? You had no idea the amount of people in that Chinese community, and that stems to like there's a lack of Asian American history being represented in school curriculums. I know there's slowly been efforts being made to expand the curriculum and what they call like ethnic studies. Mm-hmm. Texas, actually, where that's currently being a proposed bill to promote African American and Mexican American studies in public schools, which if passed, hopes to kind of pave the way for Asian and Indigenous studies. And I know California actually made news recently about the Board of Education recently approving the ethnic studies model curriculum. So, given the diversity of our country, why do you think this issue still exists today?
Yeah,
go ahead, Baldwin.
No, you go first. No, you hang up.
We're married. I think I don't know if you mentioned that, but like we're married if people didn't know.
But they're not divorced. They're just in separate locations right now.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's important right now. I mean, education is definitely our priority right now. We signed with an education distributor, New Day Films, and our film is available for university students through their Canopy system right now. Simply because education, we feel like, is very valuable, and it's really the thing that's going to really help change. Hopefully change our students and change who we are by understanding each other better. I do think it's important because I think everything you're seeing today with the anti-Asian this or that is really because people don't understand that Asian American is really American. It's not anti-Asian American hate. It's really anti-American hate. The problem is that most people in this country aren't correlating this face that you see in the screen right now, as American. And part of that problem is because we haven't been educated on our significance, our history in this country. And unfortunately, whatever history you've seen, whatever you see on TV, whatever the very little that you learn about in schools is negative. And so we're cast as outsiders, people that don't belong, not able to ever fit in. And that's unfortunate that even in the media, like in the early newspapers that defined and described who Chinese people were, it was always very harmful and ugly and demeaning. So for us to be able to show this film now and to have other people hopefully share their stories about their history in America, I think that'll help open people's eyes to understanding that we actually are also a part of this dynamic of America, and there's a lot of history here. We're not trying to. Well, Larissa, you said really well about like how we're uncovering. We're not trying to replace, but we're trying to uncover, right?
Yeah, I mean, I'll jump in here so that Baldwin doesn't mangle the analogy, but
yeah, because it's your analogy about the folding and unfolding.
Yeah, well, I think the way we have to look at American history is really seeing the whole, like literally the whole picture. And I think I liken it to, you look at a photo album and you've seen a photo a million times, and maybe the corners have been covered over, and that's just how you've seen that photo the whole time, until somebody actually opens up the rest of the photo album and takes the photo out and unfolds the corners, and they're like, there's other family members there the whole time. Like, we've been here the whole time. This isn't a matter when we're talking about, adding history. We're talking really more about broadening history and showing the complete picture. Because I know some people feel threatened, like, oh, we're canceling, history, or we're diminishing another minority group's history if we're now including another group here. And it's not a competition. It's just unfolding the corners and seeing the whole picture. We were there the whole time. We're not trying to Photoshop anybody in that wasn't there. It's telling the whole complete picture. And, once you know that family story, which is, I think, our history of America, then it's like, yes, we should be invited to all the family picnics, shouldn't we? Because we have been here and we have contributed. And I think that's the thing about Far East, Deep South in particular, when we're talking about ethnic studies. And I think it's a great thing. I mean, it's just sad. I wish we didn't need to have these initiatives started, because in our case, we don't even need to wait for ethnic studies to get passed, because we all learn about the American South. We all learn about segregation. And so our film and the story of the Chinese and Asians and other minority groups that were impacted by Jim Crow, like that fits naturally already, into existing American history lessons. I think it is important that we learn not just about building railroads, slavery, and like Japanese internment camp, and just those things, right? When we're talking about communities of color, or especially the AAPI community. And it's just, we want to learn more. We want to learn about other contributions. That's why we have to have those ethnic studies, introduced, because we're not learning it. But in our case, we fit right into regular American history lessons. And so that's our hope, is we start there. Every major war, I mean, we've all just been celebrating the gold medal of honor, honoring Chinese American Congressional Gold Medal of Honor, honoring the World War II veterans that are Chinese American, and that's only one of the wars. Vietnam War, Korean War. I mean, there have been AAPIs, even in the Civil War, who have been fighting for our country. And so, there's existing lessons in history that we can already start to broaden those. And, eventually we'll learn about other people and other parts of history, because even our story, it's like, sometimes we don't learn the history of just families, right? But honestly, all our family stories is what makes up history. It's not just about who's president and all just the laws that were passed in this country, but we are history, and our families are part of history.
No, that's well said. Yeah, it definitely starts with the family, the individual family as well, to kind of drive that history and education forward. I really liked the fact that you were able to show us the 16 millimeter film reels at the very end. I thought that was such a treat to get that insight on the stuff that you had never seen before. And it's kind of fortuitous that you now get to add your films to your family legacy or your family history. Is it your hope that your daughter can one day continue this legacy as well? Is she having any aspirations to be a filmmaker?
She has aspirations for a lot of things, but I mean, history seems to be in her blood now. She loves history. She reads about different people, historical people in our country. And so she definitely has an inclination for wanting people to understand history, and herself just trying to learn it. We had a joke last night, I think, right, Larissa? We're saying like, what if my dad, I think my parents are actually watching this right now. And we're just joking like, what if dad actually has more film reels and we have no idea? Like, maybe we need to like just search through their closet.
What else does he have hiding in his house that we're gonna find one day? But our daughter loves to even just tell other people. Like, if she learns about a historical figure, I think she goes around telling all her friends. And so like, she wants to, I think, author books about historical figures. And so I love the fact that that's rubbing off her, because I know Baldwin and I both have like had no interest in history growing up. And I think part of it, again, going back to why it's important, is I think we don't see ourselves represented in history, or don't feel a connection to it. Maybe we'll tune it out, or it's just head knowledge, but we don't think like it actually affects us. And so, how many times did Baldwin like drive by Angel Island in San Francisco, and then all of a sudden it's like, wait, my family was actually there? Or how many times, have we learned about Jim Crow laws? And never until I stepped into that museum in Mississippi did I realize that people that looked like us also were subject to the same laws back in that time period. And so I think it's important for us to know, again, back to that family picture, like we have to know the whole history, because it gives us a sense of belonging, not from our point of view as AAPIs, but also I think for America at large, who are not AAPI, to see us belonging as part of the fabric of America.
Yeah, I mean, there's clearly a lot of work that needs to be done right now. I mean, we're seeing all these tensions rise over the last year, and it's not new. And I think it's great that you have a lot of organizations like OCA, that are doing things to try to make the future better. But what I like to say is, like, if we have to learn about our past in order to know what got us to where we are today, and only then can we effectively create a better future. And I think there's a lot of people that are trying to create a better future without understanding what got us here in the first place. And so we're running around in circles trying to do things or make policies or say the right thing without really even understanding why we have to say them. And it's like, if we just knew our history, if we were always included, if we could bring all that understanding clearer so we understand why we're in this predicament in the first place, then we can start making solutions to help, make the future better, and solutions that are more effective.
Yeah, we definitely don't want our daughter, going back to your original question. I mean, it's like our daughter shouldn't have to answer the same questions, and have the same debates we're having like 20 years from now. We really hope that the tide can turn with her and the next generation and the next generation, because, I think, as you see in the film, like some of these themes of whether it's bullying or, racial slurs or just the sense of not belonging, we feel that today. And, how much older are the people that we show in our film, and even Baldwin's, the people that have passed on, our ancestors, they were still feeling the same thing. And so, we want to break the cycle. We want to change things, and we have to go to the root. And in our case, we believe part of that solution is in the education.
No, that's both well said. And I know we're kind of winding down towards the end of our interview. And, thank you for being so candid. I just love these type of conversations that we get to have with filmmakers where we can really dive deep. This year's festival theme was about raising communities, and the film block that we had originally slot you with was raising parents. The heart of this documentary is about helping a father rediscover the love he had for his own father, but also bridging the gap between him and you and Edwin. Do you feel like this was your initial goal whenever you were just setting out to make a documentary about uncovering your roots?
Definitely not the original goal. I think the original goal was really, wow, this is some crazy history. The whole father and sons thing, that was Larissa's idea, it
really happened in real life, but like that wasn't.
But I couldn't see it, right? I didn't see it. Larissa saw it from this third-person view, watching and observing us. I didn't see that.
Well, I think part of that is I think it's very rare that you have a situation where you have father and son learning, or sons, I should say. If Edwin's watching out there, I know. You're included too. Where the father and sons go on this journey together of discovering information, because normally like the parents have more information or, than you do. Right. And so it was just, they were discovering all this at the same time. And I think that's what made the journey really special, is there was the one thing in their life that they did together. Baldwin never experienced coming to the US at 14 years old, having to be raised by his grandmother with bound feet. It was his father's story. His father didn't know what it was like to be the first, or what Baldwin thought was he was the first one born in his country, wanting to play football, wanting to do hip hop that his dad didn't approve of. Those are things that they didn't have any perspective, but they both know now what it's like to discover the past that they both never knew, or all three of them. Sorry, Edwin, you're included too.
So going right into that, what's the next step for the two of you now that you've kind of, you found all of this information about, your grandfather, your great-grandfather's history, or great-grandparents, I should say. What kind of upcoming projects are next for the two of you? Are you going to still kind of trying to continue cataloging even further into your history, or what other things are going on with y'all these days?
Well, I think our film for Far East Deep South, I mean, even though we had a year of virtual festivals and we're just now breaking into being able to do things live again, I think it feels like we've been doing this for a while, but I feel like we're really also just starting. Like I mentioned earlier, we signed with an education distributor, New Day Films. So we're working really hard to try to get our film into universities and into the curriculum, into media libraries, and working with professors to incorporate how they're going to put it into their classes. And then also reaching down to the junior high and high school level as well, working with schools and trying to get that in the schools, because we know earlier the better. And so we do. So for university students, they can watch the film on Canopy. They can also contact us through New Day Films or through FarEastDeepSouth.com. But Larissa, maybe you can explain what we're doing with the younger students with our first class initiative and how we're trying to penetrate the education market over there.
Yeah, I mean, we understand that, it's important to try to get our youth early with a lot of this education so that, they're not adults like us going like, what? Chinese in Mississippi? And we started this thing called the First Class Initiative because we know a lot of schools, especially during this pandemic, have had funding cut or frozen. And so we wanted to make sure schools, especially in underserved neighborhoods, would have access to our films. And so we started something called the First Class Initiative, where people can make a tax-deductible contribution to be able to have us gift copies of and screen copies of our film for the first time in classrooms in middle schools and high schools. And also, if you know of a school, especially for those in the Houston area or even beyond, please let us know. If you're a teacher that falls into that category, please reach out to us at fareastdeepsouth.com. We would love to hear from you because we know a lot of the teachers kind of dictate what gets shown in the classrooms. And so we want to work with school districts and teachers and principals to make sure that it's being used. In the classroom, we're developing a discussion guide right now to go with the DVDs or in the screener, if it's virtual, if it's a digital screener. And we know there's a lot of schools out there. And so we want to make sure that every single school, if possible, can get a copy or screen a copy for their classrooms and have these discussions about this important American history. And then
we're also working with corporations. There's a lot of DEI programs these days where people are wanting to be more inclusive of diversity, and we always want to say we don't want to be diverse just for the sake of diversity. We really want to be diverse for the sake of authenticity. This is real history. These are real stories. We're just telling the truth, and I feel like people understand our stories more when they realize and understand there's authentic. Is that a really word? Authenticness to our story, So if you work for a corporation and you have a program that just wants to do more diversity and better understanding of who we are, especially in light of what's been going on over the last year, please, contact us as well. We'd love to work with your corporations and companies and organizations to do virtual screenings and discussions. I think actually the discussions like what we're doing right now, I feel like it's actually more important than the film. Obviously, we want everyone to watch our film, but I feel like the discussions that come out of the film, I think those are the more important things as we can lead those into action steps.
Yeah. And we are working on possibly another film, and we joke it might be called Far East Rocky Mountains because, really quickly, we found out on Baldwin's mom's side that Baldwin's great-grandfather actually worked on the Transcontinental Railroad and ended up in Denver, Colorado. We only found this out like about 6 months ago. So there's a whole nother story there about how there used to be a Chinatown and there isn't one anymore. And there was riots, anti-Asian race riots there, in Denver, Colorado. And so there's a whole fascinating story that we hope to kind of dig into. That might be our next project.
That's really cool. I'm very excited. There's actually a conversation I recall last year as well that mentioned you were getting requests from other people to conduct similar research on their family roots. Will you be helping out? Like, will you be forming those into documentaries as well, or are those just more like private requests that they just wanted help with starting the research on their own?
Well, it definitely starts off as that, but then some people have asked us to do their film as well, and I think that was when they saw Finding Cleveland because they haven't quite seen Far East Deep South yet. Now we have this full blown feature length film, so the cost is going to be a whole lot more. So if people are willing to hire us to do something like this, I think we're down for it. But yeah. You'll have to see if Larissa's willing to do it. I think she wants to do more music.
Well, yeah, I mean, we're, again, if somebody has the budget that's willing, to or help us get the budget to do that project, we will entertain other ideas and other family, stories to document, because there's certainly a lot of worthwhile ones. But yes,
yeah,
if you're not, I'm sure all the filmmakers, will concur with me that it takes a lot of resources to do a film. So it isn't, at least if you want a high caliber one, if you don't want to, you could also just do stuff on your phone if you want. Just take your cell phones and shoot for your own posterity. But yes, right. If you want one that's on, our film aired on PBS last month. So if you want something that airs on PBS or ends up in the theaters, that's a whole nother budget.
And I know we've kind of mentioned it throughout the interview, but once again, if audiences would like to watch your film again, either Finding Cleveland or Far East Deep South, how can they watch your film?
Yeah, definitely follow us. Oh, go ahead. Oh, go ahead. No, you go ahead. Okay.
No, I went first last time. Go for it.
You can go to our website, fareastdeepsouth.com, and also follow us on Instagram and Facebook at Far East Deep South. We're also on Twitter. You just drop the last 3 letters. It's Far East Deep So, because they didn't let us have all the letters. But we are going to be announcing some more screenings, and we have there's another film festival coming up in the summer that I don't know if we could. What?
I think I could tell. I think they're allowing us to say, well, it's in a hot desert place. That begins with a letter P and ends with an X.
So there might be a film festival, and that one's in person. If you're
live.
In that area or know somebody in that. We will be probably airing on PBS again at some point. So keep posted, whether it's through our newsletter or social media, on those screenings. And there is a screenings page on our website that will be updated as we know screenings. Again, like Baldwin said, if you know a school or if you know an organization that wants to help screen our film privately or even publicly, let us know. We would love to collaborate with you and see what we can do for the community.
Yeah, and also just a reminder with the schools, Canopy, it's available right now for students in the university system. So definitely have access there too.
And schools can license our film if they're not part of the Canopy on newday.com.
Yeah.
That's awesome. I'm so honored to talk with the both of you about your film, and I'm really excited to see all the ways that viewers are really able to access it and be able to share the same experiences that y'all had in making the film. Because it's like you said, it's just a story that anybody can relate to about uncovering their roots and really finding out what their history is and kind of the steps that they can go through, and that it's so easy. Like, you don't have to be, like you said, you can be an amateur investigator and still come out with the same results. And it's just so fascinating to see the journey that you've had and be able to kind of follow along the way. So thank you so much for allowing us to be, part of your adventure.
Yeah, and thank you for all your support and just being a champion of our film. It has really meant a lot to us.
Yeah, and organizations like OCA, I mean, that's so awesome that you guys are using film, to spread the word about who we are and who our community represents and all the different vastness within our community. So it does take organizations like OCA and festivals like HAAPIFEST to really help get the word out and show these films from different filmmakers like us, in order because we can't do it alone, and we understand that we need to team up with other people, and so hopefully we can do more together.
No, absolutely. Well, Baldwin, Larissa, thank you so much for taking the time out, and we hope you get to enjoy many more activities and screenings to come, because I know your film has that type of longevity that you don't have to be a certain age, you don't have to be a certain ethnicity to get the same lesson out of it. So thank you.
Thanks, and hope to see you in real life in Houston sometime.
Yes. Let's go get that barbecue.
Anytime. Thank you.
Bye, everybody.
Bye. Bye. This concludes tonight's Q&A. Audience, if you'd like to follow Baldwin and Larissa and get updates on Far East Deep South and their other projects, please go to their website and social media handles below. And that's it. This concludes HAAPIFEST 2021. I'd like to do a special shout out thank you to all of the filmmakers, all of the guests, all the volunteers and community partners and sponsors that were with us on this journey for 2021. Lisa, of all, the audience, thank you so much for taking the time out to watch all of these films and Q&As. We couldn't have done it without you. Please follow our social media, as we will be announcing the grand jury winners for each of the film categories in the coming days. We're looking forward to also 2022. We'll be opening up the film submissions in the fall, so please look out for haapifest.com and all of our social media as we relay more details in the coming months. Have a great evening, everybody.